In 1998, when Michael Jordan won his last championship, the mid-range jumper was the most common shot in the NBA, making up 40% of all field goal attempts, while just 11% of all shots were three-pointers. But in 2023, it's the reverse. Three-pointers now make up 39% of all shots, while just 13% are from mid-range. After Steph Curry won his first championship and the three-point revolution changed the NBA, teams started to adapt. Everybody became more focused on guarding threes and layups, which suddenly made mid-range shots more available. So the mid-range isn't really dead, but only the most skilled players shoot it efficiently, just like only the best shooters shot threes in the 90s. But before we start off this list, bear in mind that some of the placements may be controversial, as it wasn't easy differentiating small differences in percentages, styles, and eras. But to put this list together, we looked at volume, efficiency, consistency, the eye test, and the degree of difficulty in different eras of the NBA. Without further ado, these are Nonstop's top 10 best mid-range shooters of all time. And at number 10, we have a guy that resisted the three-point movement more than any other current NBA player. Many of his coaches tried to make him shoot more threes, but DeMar DeRozan was always more comfortable inside the three-point line.
We're in the Movado last minute of tonight's game, and DeRozan hits!
In the last 7 years, DeRozan led the NBA in mid-range attempts 4 times. And since he came to the NBA, nobody has attempted more mid-range shots. Middies are 51% of his scoring output, while three-pointers are just 9%. And in terms of attempts, DeMar's averaging just 1.5 threes per game and over 8 mid-range shots. On average, NBA players make mid-range shots at 38%, while DeRozan is making his favorite shot at 42% efficiency throughout his career. DeMar's crafty footwork, spins, pump fakes, and the ability to turn over either shoulder makes him very unpredictable and extremely tough to guard. But while DeMar certainly is the staple of the mid-range in the modern NBA, DeRozan is not the most efficient. Devin Booker was drafted in 2015 at the start of the three-point revolution, and even though he's launching nearly 6 threes per game, Book is also killing it from the mid-range. Throughout his career, 35% of all his shots are middies, and he's making them at 46% efficiency in the regular season. And in the playoffs, it's even better at 47%. In the 2023 playoffs, Book made 57% of his mid-range shots on 6 attempts per game. Other current players that deserve a mention are CJ McCollum and Chris Middleton, who are both 47% career shooters from mid-range, averaging 5 such shots per game. And at number 9, we have an NBA legend and one of the best shooters of all time, Larry Bird. Because the NBA first started tracking shot location in the 96-97 season, we don't have the most precise stats on Larry and exactly how efficient he was from mid-range. But we do know that Bird averaged 19 field goal attempts per game, out of which only 2 were three-pointers. And since Bird wasn't much of a dunker, it's safe to say that out of his 17 attempted 2s per game, more than 50% must have been mid-range shots. Larry made 51% of his 2-pointers, which tells us what we already knew. Bird was a knockdown shooter who could get his shot over anybody, and then follow it up with some of the finest trash talk.
Bird bumps O'Corin, turns, and hits.
Other 80s legends that also deserve a mention here are Alex English, Adrian Dantley, Bernard King, and George Gervin. All of those guys are NBA scoring champions who did their best work in the mid-range, and they all shot over 50% from 2 for their entire careers. At number 8 is a player who scored over 28,000 points in the NBA, and even though he could knock down threes, most of his points came from inside the three-point line. Carmelo Anthony was an absolute killer in the mid-range because he could hurt you in many different ways. Stay too close to him, he's going to put you at the hip and you're toast. Back away, he's sinking that J right in your face. Melo had all the tricks in the book when it came to scoring, and for his career, he averaged over 7.5 mid-rangers per game, converting 41%. While some players on this list may have been more efficient than Melo, he made this list based on volume, consistency, and the value that mid-range provided to his overall game. The greatest example of this is the 2013 game against Miami, when Melo scored 50 points, and all his points came from jumpers. Melo shot 18 for 26 from the field, including 11 for 16 from mid-range. And this may be subjective, but Melo probably had the prettiest jumper out of anyone on this list.
Down to 5. Anthony guarded by Covington. 3 seconds. Carmelo shoots and hits. Carmelo Anthony.
Another former Knicks legend that deserves a mention is Allen Houston, a 2-time All-Star and their best player in the 1999 Finals run. Houston's game winner in the 99 playoffs against the Heat was one of the most clutch moments in Knicks playoff history.
That usually means something for Ewing. Allen Houston. Houston ducks under. Got it!
He shot 46% from mid-range during his career on 6 attempts per game. And at number 7 is a guy that's mainly known for his trash talking, defense, and the phrase, "Anything's possible!" But don't get it twisted, Kevin Garnett had a hell of a jumper too. KG played in the era of stretch fours in the 90s and 2000s, power forwards that could shoot, but their range rarely extended beyond the three-point line. Carmelo was one of the first stretch fours, and his legendary elbow jumper after a pick and pop with John Stockton was killer. Then came Tim Duncan and his equally legendary bank shot. Chris Webber, Pau Gasol, David West, Carlos Boozer, and Al Horford were all stretch fours from that era that made numerous All-Star teams, and they deserve to be mentioned here. But among all those guys we mentioned, Garnett was the most consistent and most efficient. Mid-range jumpers made up for 55% of his total offense, and he connected on 45% of them. In the playoffs, his efficiency didn't drop off either, and KG made 44% of his mid-range jumpers in 143 playoff games. And at number 6, we have a guy that played Garnett and who influenced many people on this list, Kobe Bean Bryant. The Black Mamba was dangerous from all areas of the floor, but he was most venomous in the mid-range. For every defensive move, Kobe had a countermove, a feint, spin, cross, or pump fake, and it was impossible to predict what he was going to do.
The save. Oh, you got to get a shot here. Final seconds. Bryant for the win. Bang!
Mid-range shots were the biggest part of Kobe's offensive diet, as 44% of all his field goal attempts were middies, and he made them at 41% efficiency in the regular season and 42% in the playoffs. And while there are players whose efficiency numbers are better than Kobe's, we have to consider that Mamba played in the 2000s, which was the hardest era ever for NBA scorers. Kobe had to deal with hand-checking until 2004, then zone defenses, double and triple teams, and out of all the players on this list, his jumpers certainly had the biggest degree of difficulty. The fact that he increased his efficiency in the playoffs is spectacular, especially because he averaged more than 9 mid-range shots per game. In the 2010 playoffs, Bryant played with a broken finger and a bone spur in his ankle, and he still made 45% of his mid-range shots throughout the playoffs, and then clinched the title for the Lakers. At number 5 is a guy that has 2 Finals MVPs, enormous hands, and a weird laugh. Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi came to the NBA in 2011. He wasn't known as a shooter, and he averaged just 8 points per game. But as Duncan, Ginobili, and Parker were getting older, Kawhi started getting more comfortable on the offensive end. And thanks to his crazy work ethic, it didn't take long before he became one of the best shooters in NBA history. For his career, Kawhi is close to shooting 50, 40, 90. He's the 30th most efficient shooter in NBA history and 4th most efficient in the playoffs. Mid-range shots are about 1/3 of his total attempts, and he's making 46%. But just like Kobe, Kawhi is more efficient in the playoffs than in the regular season. In the last 5 playoffs, Leonard made more than 50% of his mid-range shots on 6.5 attempts per game. During the 2019 title run, it seemed like Kawhi was really a robot, because it looked like he was going to make every shot, even if the ball has to bounce 4 times before it goes in.
It's off to Leonard, defended by Simmons. Is this the dagger?
And if Kawhi's title run was impressive, what can we say about the 2011 championship run of a certain 7-foot blonde German? At number 4, we have Dirk Nowitzki, widely regarded as the best shooting 7-footer of all time. Dirk scored over 30,000 points in the NBA, and most of them came via his trademark one-legged fadeaway from mid-range, one of the most unguardable shots in NBA history. Nowitzki led the NBA in mid-range attempts for 3 years in a row between 2009 and 2011. But Dirk wasn't just jacking up a lot of shots and missing. No sir. Dirk was always among the most efficient players too, and that's why he ranks so high on this list. Mid-range shots made up 55% of Dirk's offensive diet, and he made 47% of them. He was equally good in the playoffs, where he hit 46% of his middies. During the 2011 title run, he was shooting nearly 10 mid-range shots per game, and he made them at a 48% clip, being consistently great. Another 7-footer who deserves to be mentioned here is another European MVP and Finals MVP, Nikola Jokic. The Joker's biggest strength is his passing, which slightly overshadows the fact that he's one of the most efficient shooters of all time. Even though Jokic is really shining with short hook shots and floaters in the paint, paint, and mid-range shots make up just 18% of his total attempts, he's converting them at a 48% clip. His MVP rival Joel Embiid is another great shooting 7-footer, and he's taking about 6 mid-range shots per game with a 44% efficiency. But it's easy to shoot over people when you're 7 foot tall. It takes real skill to be 6 foot tall and still be one of the best mid-range shooters of all time. At number 3 is Chris Paul, the point god, who is better known for his passing than scoring. Since he came to the NBA, nobody has been involved in more pick and rolls than CP3. And because he's a passing wizard, bigs usually sag off CP because they're afraid of a pass to the roll man. And after he's gotten rid of his own defender after a screen or a dribble, Chris usually finds himself all alone at his sweet spot, at the elbow, just around the left or right side of the free throw line. Thanks to his impeccable footwork and high release point on his jumper, Chris is phenomenal at creating separation and then launching a shot that nobody can block, despite his short stature. CP3 is so deadly from that area of the floor that the elbow can easily be called the Chris Paul zone. Mid-range shots make up 42% of his total attempts, and he's making that with 48%, both in the regular season and the playoffs. In the 2021 finals, Paul made 60% of his middies, and in the 2022 playoffs, he made a whopping 70%.
Paul dancing, driving, shooting, scoring, Paul!
But since we're talking about Hall of Fame point guards, we have to give an honorable mention to a few more players. Steve Nash is one of the greatest shooters of all time, and it's a shame that he didn't shoot more. He converted 48% of his mid-range shots, even though he attempted just 4 per game. The greatest shooter of all time, Mr. Steph Curry, is not an avid mid-ranger, but he still makes them with 46% efficiency, both in the regular season and the playoffs. Kyrie Irving is slightly better at 47% in the regular season, but is worse in the playoffs at 44%. But among all current players, when the game is on the line and the team needs a mid-range shot for the win, we would pick nobody above Easy Money Sniper. At number 2 is Kevin Durant, who is breaking all kinds of mid-range records. Over the last 25 seasons, there are 1,700 different times that a player has taken at least 250 mid-range jumpers in a season, and there are just 3 times that a player has shot over 55%. All those 3 seasons belong to Kevin Durant, who in 2023 shot 57% from mid-range, and in 2022 and 21, 55%. Needless to say, KD led the league in mid-range percentage in the last 3 regular seasons. In the playoffs, he led the NBA in mid-range attempts in the previous 3 seasons and also in 2019. For his career, Durant averages 7.7 mid-range attempts per game, or about 41% of his total shots. He's a 47% career shooter between 10 feet and a three-pointer, and he has that same 47% efficiency in the playoffs. His ball handling, shooting touch, size, and strength make him one of the most elegant and most unstoppable mid-range scorers ever. Most of the time, defenders can do nothing to stop him, but hope he misses the shot.
Here's Durant, putting moves, crossover on Giannis, and hits! Plus the foul!
A similar story goes for the defenders that had to guard the number 1 on our list. He wasn't a 7-footer, but he had a 48-inch vertical, and nobody could stay in the air as long as him. Of course, we're talking about Mr. Air himself, Michael Jordan. In the earlier part of his career, MJ was known more for his dunking, while his jumper and post game weren't yet polished. But ever since he hit that shot over Craig Elo in 1989, mid-range jumpers became the biggest staple of Jordan's game.
He looks, he gives to Jordan. Jordan to the circle, puts the shot in the air. Good! The game's over, and the Bulls have won.
His unreal athleticism allowed him to create separation whenever he wanted. And even when he was doubled, he could still sink his patented turnaround jumper without ever getting blocked or even bothered. And because of his enormous hands, defenders couldn't strip the ball from him either. In the early 90s, when Jordan started lifting weights and added muscle, he could also create separation with his back and shoulders. And there was literally nothing a defender could do to stop him. We were already mentioning that the NBA started tracking shooting locations in '97. So we only have Jordan's exact shooting numbers in his final 2 seasons in Chicago and the 2 years he spent in Washington as a 40-year-old. But in all 4 of those seasons, MJ led the NBA in mid-range attempts, averaging 14 mid-range attempts per game. The mid-range was a surreal 65% of his total scoring output, and Jordan made 45% of those shots. Before his first retirement in '93, Jordan averaged 22 two-point shots per game on 53% field goal percentage, which means that he probably led the NBA in mid-range attempts every year, with efficiency in the high 40s. While we'll never know the true numbers, it doesn't matter. We have seen enough Jordan game winners that we can safely say that he's the greatest mid-range shooter of all time.